So I got introduced to it by a mate who'd got really into MMA. He had sort of 5 or 6 amateur fights back in 2010. And he, at a house party, was like, oh, I bet you can't tackle me. And knowing nothing, I was like, yeah, I've played rugby with you. You're shit. This will be easy. And I went straight for like classic rugby tackle, and he just guillotined me.
Yeah.
And from there, I was like, I've got to learn this. This is amazing.
Yeah.
And then went to a class with him, and Martin, the instructor, who runs Memento Mori, which is the gym that I didn't realize this at the time, but can't think of the Irish MMA fighter who's doing very well at the moment.
Which one? Ian Gary?
In the UFC. Ian Gary, yeah. So he, God, I'm bad with names. He apparently trains with his striking coach at Memento Mori. Like, they all know him. They all see him quite regularly. But yeah, Martin, who runs that place, he was at the time like a 60-kilo vegan. And I was like 94, 95-kilo prop. I was like, this is going to be easy. And he ruined me. I was like, this is awesome. I need to learn this. And then stupidly went back to rugby for a few years. And then when I decided I'd taken enough head knocks, went back to Jiu Jitsu and was like, again, like, this is amazing.
Yeah. It's good. Yeah. There's so much Jiu Jitsu stuff as well. I've just like applied over to training rugby guys too. Like, we'll do so much contact stuff. A lot of clubs and teams now have black belts as either consultants or contact coaches that come in to teach wrestle and contact stuff. It's definitely.
I think it was in the UK. It was definitely. I know they were quicker to adopt a lot of that in Australia, but I know in the UK, I think it was Dean Amersinger started working with maybe Leicester Tigers. I might be getting that wrong, but one of the Premiership clubs.
With Ollie Richardson, I think at the time.
Yes.
Maybe. Yeah,
it might have been. I might be misremembering, but yeah, he came in to do a lot of that. And I remember like Wasps were quite quick to get London shoot fighters involved as well. There's realization that there was this whole aspect of the game that people had just kind of been figuring out rather than actually having any sort of meaningful training in.
And rugby league, it's even bigger, just because obviously rugby league is basically running and wrestling together.
Yeah.
It's basically all it is: run into someone and then wrestle, and then just do that 5 times before you give the ball away. That's pretty much rugby league in a nutshell.
But those league boys are terrifying. I don't want anything to do with any of that. I played union because you could have a rest. I don't want to just run into people.
And then league, you got the 10-meter run up too, so you got more time to build speed. I'm like, dude, there's no way. And then these big, like 120-kilo Polynesian guys and stuff. You're like, I'm just good being the trainer. I'm just going to be. I'm the guy at the back in the blue, like orange shirt with the water bottles. That's all good for me. but we'll get this started. We'll leave that all anyway. But welcome to the Sweet Times of Fighting podcast. Today we have David Ellenson from Get Strong, Roll More. Welcome.
Hi. Thank you for having me.
No, thank you for coming on. For anyone listening, I never do this, but make sure you leave a review or share it or comment or something, anything. People who don't create content, I think, don't realize like that is literally like the currency for content creators. If you do any of that, you help support the shit out of this podcast and anything, basically any content that comes through. But we're going to go straight into, I guess, a jiu-jitsu focused episode here with David. So let's you want to give them a background about yourself? I believe, did you learn under the tutelage of William Wayland? Is that like kind of like one of your main mentors?
Yeah. So the running joke in my head is I'm Poundland William Wayland, because I was really fortunate. I don't have a degree in any of this. I did history and philosophy at uni. I did a history master's, and then I did a history PGCE and became a secondary school history teacher for 8 years. And while I was doing that, I got back into jiu-jitsu. And at some point along there, everything started hurting. And so I'd been reading Will's stuff since like 2010, back on the Scramble blog. And I just reached out to him. Like, I'd followed him back then on Facebook and was reading his posts, and just messaged him to get in contact, and was lucky enough to start working with him. And then it turned out that I'd done my teacher training with his sister, which was surreal. And I found that out because she was like, why do you follow my brother on Facebook? That's weird. And she was like, oh, I bet it's the strength stuff, isn't it? I was like, yeah, it is. Started working with him. And then in 2019, I just had enough of the sort of surrounding things around teaching. Like, I loved classroom teaching. I loved doing the job, but the admin, the politics. I could. My wife basically turned to me and said, "You can either shut up about it or quit." And I was like, "Fuck, I don't think I'm going to shut up. I think I better quit." So I didn't really know what to do, and I had a couple of friends suggest personal training, and then I thought, well, I'll just talk to Will, because the first thing he said to me was, "Don't do it," and I was like, "I'm still going to do it." And I was like, "Good," because if that had been enough to stop you, then you shouldn't. But yes, I was lucky enough to work with Will because he was my coach and just be able to pick his brains, ask questions. I've been interested in all of it since about 2006. So like reading T Nation, reading like all the elite FTS stuff, and now going back over it, I'm like, I didn't understand any of that when I read it first time round.
That was the golden age of content back then. I just had like an RSS feed on whatever those blog things are, and I would literally have like how many blogs, RSS feeds I'll go through every day and just read articles from all the different things. That was awesome.
Yeah. So I also had a few people kind of ask me like, "Oh, are you doing a mentorship under Will? How did you do that?" I was like, work with him for a year and send him really niche history memes, and then eventually you just kind of get this working relationship. But yeah, I'm lucky enough to call Will a friend. I've been down to visit a few times and see what they were doing down at Powering Through and what he's been doing with the golfers and stuff. So yeah, but that's where I started, which with hindsight now is quite fortunate, because I'm really working with probably one of the best coaches in the UK, at least. I think in combat sports he is the guy, but of course I'm going to say that because I worked under him and was lucky enough to kind of train under him. But yeah, I think it's nice to have come in from that perspective. It does mean that I've had to fill in some of the gaps, because there's certain things where I ask about it and Will's just like, yeah, that's dumb. Usually he will then elaborate on what he means by it, but it's nice to make your own mistakes as well. So there's been times where he's told me stuff and I go, okay, and then I go and experiment and I have to come back and go, yep, you were right. But occasionally there are
examples of those.
So some of the stuff around conditioning, like I was quite interested in the whole zone 2 thing, because it became really sexy a couple of years ago. I was like, yeah, I'll have a play with this. And then within a week, I was like, I am not doing like whatever the 6 to 8 hours of zone 2 that you need to be doing. I was like, this is insane. If you had the hours and you've got someone who is motivated to do it, great. It is a fantastic method to use. But like that was what Will warned me about. And I was like, oh, I'm going to have a play with it. And then a week later, I was like, yeah, I don't think this is the right fit for me. That would be my key example. I think as well, his understanding of the neck and neck training is probably beyond a lot of other people's. I think largely because a lot of the neck stuff that you find is influenced by him, especially in combat sports. I'm sure there are plenty of other people as well that I'm just not aware of, but because he's worked in Superbike and he was bringing some of the stuff that they were doing in F1 and in Superbike along with it to the space. So, like I had someone send me something recently about sort of reactive strength for neck strength for fighters. And I remember Will playing with that about 5 or 6 years ago with one of his Superbike riders, because that was like the peaking phase just before he went back into season. So yeah, that's one where I think he's really far forward, but it's taken me a long time to get my head around the neck training. Because coming from rugby, I've got quite a bad neck. I played prop. I was undersized. I basically just got beaten up by grown men for years of playing at a low level. But it means my neck doesn't cope with a lot of volume. It's all right with intensity, but I generally have to be a bit more careful. So I'm quite risk averse around the neck, just because through my own training, I'm like, nothing is worse than being up all night because your neck is overused. And one of the bits of advice that Will did give me was like, you want to sort of be closer to a minimum effective dose for neck, like even closer to a minimum effective dose for neck than you do in a lot of other areas, because it gets so much use in grappling sports that people aren't necessarily aware of. And I've been doing, I don't know if you know Greg Chaplin, very good physio. I had him recommended by Alex Krzyzewski, who's, if I'm pronouncing that right, I've only ever seen Alex's surname written down. He works with Will, and he put me onto Greg Chaplin, and he's released something about the neck, which is very good, that I think bridges the gap between a lot of the like really early stage rehab stuff into actually training the neck hard, which is what Will suggests. And kind of it's made the gap between the two make a bit more sense to me, so that's quite good as well. But yeah, I think sometimes Will's a very very willing to let you figure stuff out for yourself. He won't give you the answers unless you ask the right questions, which I think is something a lot of people need more of. Coming from a teaching background, I really appreciated that. Sometimes he'd be like, well, what do you think? I'm like, oh, fuck. Okay, I've got to actually got to do my homework here. So, yeah.
If you're anything like me, you're short on time. Kids, family, work, training, and having to cook meals on top of that is just not going to happen. So I'm happy to announce Trifecta Nutrition are sponsoring the podcast. You get epic meals like these ones: turkey taco bowl, Texas barbecue protein plate. These are a couple of my favorites. But it means you don't have to prepare all your own meals, and it makes getting and good nutrition relatively easy. I've tried other meal delivery companies. Most of them are too high fat, not enough carbohydrates, or if you're getting kits where you have to cook it yourself, the portions for two is actually for one, especially if you are like me and you're training often. So if you want to take something off your plate and have meals like this delivered to your door, go down the description. There's a link there where you can order Trifecta meals. This is the performance line, which are higher protein and higher carbohydrate. And you can use code LIFTBIG40. You'll get 40% off your first order.
That's good. If anyone's interested, I've got 2 episodes with William on the podcast, so you can go back and listen to those as well. I actually wanted to touch on, so you've gone through a lot of that training.
Yeah.
And you're currently working with a lot of jiu-jitsu athletes. That's correct? I've seen a bit on your Instagram there. Do you want to maybe just do a quick little list up? I mean, you don't have to name drop. I mean, you can name drop if you want, but just, kind of what you're doing day to day now in terms of coaching.
Yeah, so day to day, I've got a mix of Gen Pop and Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. Online, it's all exclusively grapplers and largely Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. I've worked with a few amateur MMA fighters, but mainly, like, my bread and butter is grapplers. I also really like, in person, I work with a lot of Gen Pop, and I enjoy that. I think there's an awful lot that you can learn from working with Gen Pop that will serve you really well working with people interested in sport. Like, I've got a couple of competitors, but there are people out there with far more competitive level athletes than me. But the group that probably challenges me the most is the grapplers, because they come in with, if I'm sure you know, but they come in and go, oh yeah, I dislocated my finger the other day. Oh, I've just popped a rib. Like, all of these little niggles and quirks and stuff that you have to work around, which is quite helpful. But yeah, so if we're thinking, sorry, did you mean in terms of what my approach is as well, or just who I'm working with?
Oh, we can go into that too. Let's go into that.
Cool. Yeah, so I was unsurprisingly like Mr. Triphasic. I've got both Triphasics down here next to me.
How was the second book? I read mixed reviews.
It's got some nuggets in there. I can't say it blew me away like the first one did, but I think that's going to be quite difficult when you've essentially laid out a very effective training model in your first, like, difficult second album. But also, like, I liked Kierwan and Flat's point of, you can dive down all these rabbit holes, but if your guys are competing at the same level as everyone else, or like a little bit above, it's probably not doing the things that you're suggesting that it might be doing. But yeah, it didn't do it for me in the way that the first one did. There were some really good bits in there about how people get triphasic wrong. I really enjoyed that, because having had those discussions with Will, and having run it a lot myself, it's really nice to see it laid out by the guy who came up with it saying the same thing. Like the classic one of people, my biggest bugbear is people using triphasic and putting really light weights in. Like, it's an absolute, it does not work if it isn't challenging. Like, I think Cal's point in book 2 was like, he was arguing from a college perspective, but he's like, if you don't need your spotters, it's not heavy enough. Now, I probably don't go quite that far, because I haven't got 3 spotters on every single exercise that we do, but I think it's an overlooked point that people think tempo can be used to make up for a lack of intensity, or they don't even understand why the tempo's in there. They're just like, oh sweet, yeah, triphasic, I've heard of that, and they just chuck in, we're going to do 5 count eccentric for sets of 8. Like, unless you're specifically running a hypertrophy program, I would not. You don't want to be doing something like that because you're just not going to elicit the kind of response you get from 3 heavy sets of 3 with an eccentric focus or an isometric focus. So, yeah, I enjoyed the second one, but really, again, because I've worked so much with Will, like a lot of it for me is about the way that Will has applied it and kind of changes that he's made to, like, you know, you've got the compressed triphasic for those short of time. You've got what was really helpful was being able to discuss with Will how he uses it with beginners, because again, it's just a different way of forming. You know, you can go full triphasic where it's a very intense method, or you can really make it something that helps beginners to learn how to control the eccentric and the concentric well. So it can be a teaching tool. It doesn't all have to be, you know, balls to the wall, hand supported split squats and all that. There's the fun, sexy stuff that everyone thinks triphasic is. There's a lot more wiggle room with the way in which he's ordered those aspects of the program. So there's more to play with than I think people realize in there.
Do you want to maybe go through for the listeners
Yeah.
an example of like a compressed triphasic kind of training model? Maybe for something going into a competition or just looking for something different to do in their training?
Yeah. So usually the traditional form of triphasic is that you do 3 weeks with a focus on a specific part of the muscle action. So you do 3 weeks eccentric. So that just means that for a 4 count through to a 6 count, depending on how much your coach hates you or how experienced you are focusing on slowly lowering. Or if it's an isometric phase, you are focusing on quickly lowering and stopping dead and holding for that count, that specific part of the movement. Normally that's a 3-week block, and then you have a little what Cal refers to as a download or a deload, which is where you focus on something else for a week. So it's usually aerobic based circuits for lifting to give you a week to recover, and then you jump back in again into the isometric phase, and then after 3 weeks you deload, and then again you jump into concentric phase, and then you move into some peaking. And I think it's a 16-week program if you run it traditionally, 12 to 16 weeks depending on what you cut down, and that's without like GPP and all the stuff that you can put in before that can make it like a full 24 week program. Will pointed out that for most MMA fighters especially, they haven't got that kind of time to play with. There isn't like a traditional off season like you would have in college sports. So what you can do there is just run 2 weeks of everything. So it's a 2 week, let's say you take front squats as the example. You do 2 weeks of eccentric focus with sort of 80 to 87.5% of your 1 rep max if you've never run it before. You then 2 weeks later, 80 to 87.5% of your 1 rep max, run a 2-week isometric block, and then you would run a 2-week concentric block, and then into some kind of peaking just before the fight, so that you're not annihilating yourself with the fact that that's going to be the business end of camp where the hardest rounds are going to be, and then the weight cut. You want to make sure that the stuff that you're doing with them is much easier. But it's simply called compressed because you've just removed all of those deload weeks, but you've also cut the amount of work that you've had to do by a third, so it's a lot more manageable. The other thing that you generally have to do with a compressed approach with fighters, especially if they've got a big weight cut or a lot of weight to lose over the camp, is be more willing to do like 2 to 3 sets, much more willing to cut that volume by a third. Like for me, most of my guys do 3 sets of 3. If they're not feeling great, we'll do 2 sets of 3 because we just want the quality and the intensity to be very high, and we want to make sure that there's no junk volume. I think that's especially true in grappling because it's such a high volume sport in terms of how much mat time you need to become proficient and then how much mat time you need to become good. We don't want to be wasting your fatigue essentially on things that we could avoid if we still get a massive stimulus in those early stages.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
With the concentric phase, what percentages are you using there?
So for the concentric phase, I use the same again, like 80 to 87.5. Generally, it's 82.5 to 87.5, but I like a little bit of wiggle room just in case anything goes wrong. Someone comes in as I've broken my finger, or I haven't slept all week, or like most of my guys compete and they have jobs. Some of them have got families, some of them have got kids. Like they need a bit more space than, say, a college athlete does, where you can start to become a bit more strict because you control more aspects of their life. But with guys who are more experienced, you can play, especially on the eccentric phase, you can play with higher percentages. So Steve, who's literally physically my biggest client, he's just shy of 6'8". We've done, yeah. So just shy of 6'8", turned up, he could front squat ass to grass without any effort whatsoever. Like most mobile guy I've worked with.
Wow.
We've run a lot of triphasic because he was having to deal with big boys, and I was like, I need to jump him into something that's going to deliver quite a lot quite quickly. And he, basically, because he'd become so experienced with it, we were able to play with some of the more advanced methods, and literally it's just about more weight on the bar. So like between 90 and 92.5% of your 1 rep max, but you do it for it's like you can play between 1 to 2 reps of like 4 to 8 seconds eccentric, which is disgusting. I think Steve thought I'd upset him when I first programmed it for him, because he was like, "Are you joking? I have to do this for 8 seconds." I was like, "No." But it delivered, and it does a lot for him. But whether he'd want to do that year round, I don't know. I tend to stick to more of a traditional model, especially for the remote guys, unless they're very proficient. I have only really done the more advanced methods in person. So including like hand supported split squats and the like really ramping up the loading on the eccentric phase for the guys who've done it before. But he got a hell of a lot out of it in terms of, he competes in the ultra heavyweight category, and he was just, when he's competing against other people, he's never had a complaint that they felt stronger than him. He's had a lot of guys complain about how strong he is, and he's 110, 112 kilos. So he's going up against guys who are like 120, 140, and they come in and have a little cry about how strong he is. And then he's like, "Oh, but maybe some of it's my technique." Because he's a very proficient grappler. He's got a game that a lot of ultra heavies don't have. Now, as he goes up through the levels, that's going to change. But like, he's a much broader grappler than you get from a lot of guys, especially at blue belt. He's purple belt now, so it's becoming a bit more open in terms of what he has to deal with. But yeah, it's nice to be able to play with some of those things, but really I'd say that makes up a very small proportion of the training that I've done with all of my clients. The majority of it is kind of basic triphasic, and then for a lot of my Gen Pop clients, I've started to move to, because I've got people who come like once a week or twice a week, I will use those triphasic, like aspects of the triphasic program with them. Like we'll play with tempo, or we might do some cluster sets. But we will also, often on sort of 1 or 2 lifts, especially around bench, I've started playing with 5-3-1 again, because that's the old classic from Jim Wayland that I thought never worked for me. And now I've reread the book, I'm like, I just did it wrong. Lots.
You just go off like your proper max instead of off
too heavy all the time, like a complete dumbass. But it's a nice one in that it allows people to get a lot of volume in on a lift, especially something like bench. But I wouldn't touch that with grapplers, because again, it's just too much volume. There's far too much that they need to cope with. And I think actually part of the issue with grapplers is I think people, especially those who don't grapple themselves, really underestimate the cognitive load that comes from training in grappling. And I think I have less experience of it, but I think it's also true in MMA. I want a very high intensity, very low difficulty in terms of like skill development approach for those guys, because I want all of their skill development resources to be on the mats. Like personally, I don't have the space to use Olympic lifts. I don't have the equipment to use Olympic lifts. The garage, we'd break everything in my garage if we did that. And I don't have the experience to be able to coach it well, so I won't generally program it for people. I have for people who are interested, and I've chatted to other coaches who've got more experience and got their advice for doing it. But that, for me, doesn't feel like a cognitive trade-off in terms of the amount of effort they're going to have to put into skill acquisition with a coach who is not a particularly good Olympic weightlifting coach. In me, is going to be, I, coming from a teaching background, think it's just going to detract from where and how much they can learn when they're on the mats, because they're just having to think about, oh, how do I put this over my head? Or what does he mean by that coaching cue? Whereas if I can just do front squat, bench press, chin up, RDL, and trap bar, like the simplest possible ways of loading them through those movement patterns, I'm going to go for the simpler options. One, for me, and two, just to mean that they don't have lots of things to try and learn and plates to spin while they're also working out how heel hooks work and not blowing their own knees out and playing with the meta of the game. Because the other sort of point, and I think this is, again, it's especially true in MMA for guys who are very good, is they're spending a lot of time outside of training still engaging with training. They're watching tape, they're maybe watching instructionals, they're watching their favorite competitors. That's a lot of cognitive load, and especially if they've got work, they've got kids, they've got all sorts of other things around it. I want to make sure that what I do has as much impact as possible with as little fatigue as possible, but also as little impact on the rest of their life as I can. Like, of course, I've still got guys who sometimes message and go, yeah, going down the stairs this morning wasn't much fun. But that's just, that's the nature of the beast.
I like that. That's an interesting take on the learning aspect as well. And I actually wanted to jump into, you mentioned at the beginning around your neck training with your bad neck. There might be some listeners as well who have shocking necks too. So what are you doing then that helps your neck? And I guess, what are you doing in terms of, I guess, exercise selection and volume and things like that, and frequency?
So frequency for me, they train neck once a week. I tend to pair it with trap bar deadlift because they've got to sit. For me, because we're using heavy loads on that, they've got to rest 3 to 5 minutes between sets. So they're bored. So I'd rather fill that time with something useful. So I generally pair my neck work in there. It's usually banded. And it's some kind of variant of just a traditional like 4-way neck. So like nods and then side to side. And then I also really like I can't remember the technical name for it. Will has told me more than once and I can't keep it in my head. I just call it Wayland neck. But essentially it's you are loading the opposite way to the way you are moving. So by that I mean, if you're going to nod your head up and down into flexion and extension, then the load from the band is across your head, trying to pull your neck out of position.
The quasi-isometric one.
That's the one, quasi-isometric. I cannot keep that name in my head. I really like that. That makes my neck feel really good. But I don't do a lot of... I've got a neck harness. We've barely used it unless someone really struggles to keep the band on their head, in which case we'll attach the band with a carabiner and use it that way. I don't really do any like plate neck or anything like that. I am hoping to use the Chaplin neck lift, which is essentially a weighted head off the bench weighted neck flexion. But you have to be very precise about your chin tuck and your tongue posture, and that dictates how essentially failure when you stop lifting. And I that one feels good for me as well.
Right, so what do you have to do with your tongue on that one?
So you place your tongue into the roof of your mouth, kind of like everyone talks about with mewing, because that became a meme. With mewing, have you not heard of that? Where everyone
I'm
it's
not
essentially.
in the cool club.
It's not a cool club, mate. It's guys who think that their jawline is going to make them more popular with women rather than being able to talk to them, or men. But it looks maxing, all of that. But the principle is that your natural tongue posture should be your tongue rested and placed up into the roof of your mouth, and potentially with a little bit of suction. I like that because that fits into how we do our nasal breathing aerobic work, which again is Cal Diet's influence and a Will Wayland influence. Like, I really like the nasal breathing work for grapplers, especially because of all the extra benefits that we get from nasal breathing. Essentially we get conditioning and I get to push them into a parasympathetic state. And most of these guys are always on and like, I've got to learn, I've got to do this, so it's nice to give them something that naturally makes them relax a little bit. But yeah, with the Chaplin neck lift, it's the same. It's maintaining that tongue posture and kind of keeping the tongue up into the roof of the mouth rather than low down or like too far forward, pushing into the teeth. And then just with a chin tuck, so you sort of I can't think of the name of it again. Packing your neck. So again, something that Will pushes for on RDLs and trap bar deadlift and has really drilled into me. So it's been nice to see someone else approaching it and kind of, I think for Will, a lot of this was, I'm speaking for him here, I don't know, but I assume a lot of it is what he's worked out for himself and then also understands that's where we want those things to be. But he hasn't explicitly told me that, or he hasn't, I've forgotten. That's also potential. But it was nice to hear kind of Greg Chaplin talk through, right, from a physiotherapy perspective, this is also why we would probably want these positions. So yeah, it's an interesting one. I've only used it with myself. I haven't played with it with anyone else yet. And I've only used it a little bit with myself. But again, it's one that doesn't irritate my neck. Whereas I find with a lot of the high volume stuff, even body weight high volume, it just irritates. And I end up with sort of soreness and pain for a few days that I just can't sleep well, and it pisses me off. Whereas I find loading with bands seems to be as much as most people need, but I don't work with anyone who's taking head contact. When I did work with MMA fighters, I wanted to very slowly introduce it because I think for a lot of those guys, so in grappling and MMA, they spend a lot of their time in this kind of flexed, shoulders very high position, rounded over. It's why Will's justification years ago for moving to the front squat from the back squat, because often with MMA fighters, because of that posture, they're very good at doing a bad back squat, whereas it's very hard to get a front squat wrong in that way. Mm-hmm. Essentially, I start them with just body weight four-way neck and get them used to moving their neck in the different directions, because that immediately tells me if they got any impingement anywhere. Also, it gives me something to give them when their neck is bad that they can use to measure how bad it is. So just nodding up and down and then side to side, because I'm sure you've seen this and we've probably all done it. But whenever someone hurts their neck, their immediate reaction is, oh, that's really bad. And they kind of hold it and they're careful with it. And then as soon as it starts to ease, their reaction is to move their neck in a way that no one outside of a like metal concert has ever moved their neck. They immediately like throw their neck around and go, oh, how does it feel? Oh, it feels worse again. I'm like, and it's told us nothing, because I don't know if the throwing your head back did it. I don't know if the circular movement did it. I'd much rather be able to break it down into them telling me like, oh, when I nod to the left, that's uncomfortable, but the right's actually okay. And it just builds a bit of proprioceptive awareness that I think they lose a little bit from being in that defensive posture for such a long time. And then from there, we load it with bands, and kind of with my MMA fighters, I never really got to the point where we needed to go too much further than that. But if I'd had one or two of them in person, because the one that I worked with the longest was remote, I didn't want to introduce too much too soon with him. If he'd been in person, then I think we would have played with some weighted variations as well and seen how he coped with them, because I'm aware that it's also my bias. I've got a bad neck, but the last thing I want is for him to have a bad sparring session because his neck is too tired from strength training to then go into a sparring session and actually manage the levels of movement that are going to be required. Realistically, I'd rather he did it at the end of the sparring session, but who does that? Like, unless you're there to make them do that, there's very few guys who aren't top tier who are going to go, yeah, do you know what? I'll do that extra work at the end that looks like boring neck nods. And also the realities of where they can fit that strength training in their week. Again, if I could dictate where it's going to be, and I know there's going to be enough recovery between the neck training that I'm doing and the hard sparring, then I'd be more comfortable pursuing intensity. But when I know that they might do that and then walk straight into their sparring session because that was the only day in the week they could fit it because their boss made them work late, I don't want to be... I'd much rather do a little bit too little. And I'm a bit cynical about the stuff around concussion with neck strength. I think that initial study that was everyone used to talk about of like, oh, X pounds of neck strength results in X percent of
1 pound of neck strength, 5% reduction.
Yeah.
I think it was.
Yeah. And then you dig into it and you see that actually what they mean is that for 1 pound of neck weakness, it's a 5 pound increase in risk, which doesn't necessarily mean the other way around once you've hit a basic level of strength. So yeah, it's an interesting topic, and it's why I'm trying to learn more about it, because I appreciate I should probably push my guys a little bit more. But then I've also personally had a lot of issues around sleep apnea from having a big neck. And if I had to choose between, they've got a slightly weaker neck or a slightly less thick neck, and they sleep better, I feel like the quality of sleep is potentially going to offset some of the issues, especially if we're recovering from a head injury. Sleep is everything. So for me, I'd rather not be affecting the quality of their sleep by making their necks too big, having been a guy with a neck who's far too big.
Perfect. And for anyone who actually wants to go deeper on the neck stuff, I did an episode with Gary Turner, like I think it was episode like number 3, like
Oh, cool.
a few years back, and he goes deep into a lot of different neck stuff and his philosophy around it. Pretty interesting stuff. He's on a similar boat to you regarding neck training, so it's a couple of interesting camps in that. And I wanted to go deep into a couple of other training methods I think you use that you also influence from William as well. Things like everyday maxes. Is that something you implement with any of your guys? Do they lift enough? Yeah? Okay, go on to that.
So basically my methods are, if Will uses it, if Mladen Jovanovic uses it, if Cal Dietz uses it, I'm trying to broaden my horizons a little bit there, but they heavily influence me. Like when I first started in my career, I read off Will's recommendation, Strength Training Manual Volumes 1 and 2. Mm-hmm. It's a heavy read. Mladen's very kind with his time. If you've got specific questions, message him and he will answer those questions. I'm sure he'll hate me for asking everyone to message him now, but I really liked that everyday max approach. And I know that's from one of the weightlifting communities. It's not necessarily new. People have used that for a long time. I forget which Eastern European country used the approach, but Bulgarians, there we go. Of course it is. I liked that approach, especially I started with my Gen Pop clients, to be honest, because what I found was for those guys, cluster sets just didn't work. They dropped off, the quality dropped off too quickly for it to be worthwhile. And probably also because for a lot of those guys, their top end strength hasn't really leveled off. So it's not necessarily as consistent. They might hit a really good number and we go, oh, that's their max. And then when we try and use 90% of that for multiple reps, they just can't cope with the output that they need to be able to do. So I began with them going, right, well, what do we do instead? And essentially, as Mladen explains it, an everyday max is just a heavy-ish single, or I've been told by other coaches and from chatting to people who use this method, it can be a double, it can be a triple. You can shift the back offsets and everything alongside that. But you don't need to psych yourself up. You don't need like an audience. You don't need pre-workout, like metal blasting in your ears. You ain't got to like go full Chuck Vogelpol and start headbutting the bar or any of that. You can just sort of casually go in and do it. Like one of my guys likes to send me whatever he was listening to where he does it, and he listens to love songs and then does everyday maxes and like weird music. But it's nice because it gives people a little bit more control over their own training. I find that a lot of my clients assume I am like, I know, like, what weight should I use? And I'm like, like I could play that whole cult leader kind of, oh, today it must be 93.2%, rather than just being like, how does it feel? Because realistically, that's how I train myself. Like Will gives me suggestions or percentages or whatever, depending on how he's written it. And then he gives me somewhere it's like sets of 5. And I just pick what I'm going to do. And I like the fact that it gives my clients the space to push back and say, actually, I don't feel like I can do this today. And so I started to introduce it with my grapplers, and especially a couple of MMA fighters at the time that I was interested, because those guys they're very, there's this sort of sense of masculinity and identity that's around it. And also the sort of tradition of like, yeah, put me in, coach, I'll do it. And you go, oh, you got to do 92.5% today. And they're like, yeah, it's fine, I can do that. And you're watching them going, you cannot do this. And then you have to intervene, and then it knocks confidence of the individual. Like, it's just not worth it. And one of my guys is a firefighter alongside all of this. So like he could have terrible night. Like some weeks he has great shifts and he sleeps really well. And some weeks he has like hell. And he comes in and he looks like a Vietnam veteran just staring through me like, you didn't see what I saw. I'm like, okay, if you want to talk about it, we can. But I've found everyday maxes for him are really helpful because he'll do whatever I tell him to, whether his body is capable of doing it or not. And it's given him a lot of understanding of like when to push, when to back off. And it's even given him the permission to back off. Now, with some people, it's not very helpful because they'll lowball it forever. But for guys who are very good at getting themselves into trouble by pushing too hard, I really like it as an option because realistically, it's a very easy way of building strength. It's really nice with older grapplers as well because they can push when they can feel good and they can back off when they don't feel good. So, I really like that. I tend to use so you hit that easy but heavy single. You don't want it to grind. You don't want it to be like Eddie Hall hitting 300 kilos at World's Strongest Man or 400 kilos at World's Strongest Man. I forget which, but yeah, you don't want to be shaking and looking like you're going to pass out or anything like that. And it allows you to hit heavy single and the auto regulation is already built in. If it's a good week, you hit a good number. If it's a bad week, you hit an all right number. It doesn't actually matter if they feel as difficult as one another. Your nervous system knows very little difference between the two. I'm sure if you were an elite level powerlifter, that would be something different. But ultimately, these guys are only lifting so that they can do more jiu-jitsu. So we use that weight and then we take 80% of that and we do three sets of 3 as back off. The only rules that I've added are if you hit an everyday max, like personal best or a lifetime best, you're done. You don't do any back offs. If you hit it and you feel really good, because I've got another client who messaged me and was like, yeah, sorry, I hit a PB, but I also felt good. So I did the back offs. I was like, yeah, he's a strength coach himself. I was like, you're fine. You can judge that. That's okay. But the other thing that I stole, which was actually from Jim Wendler talking about working with his high school kids, he wants all trap bar reps to be silent. And I really, really like that concept because the point people struggle with is that bottom position. So not only do they get the eccentric loading nicely because they're slowly descending and finding that point in the floor and touching it, but also they get to own that bottom position, which then improves their setup for heavy singles in the future because they're more aware of what that bottom position feels like because they've spent more time there. So yeah, silent reps, and then if it's been a rough week or they feel like trash, we'll just do 2 sets of 2. Sometimes we might do 1 set of 3. It's whatever they feel like, and they can call the back off sets depending on how their week has been, how they felt, what the readiness questionnaire said at the start of the session, and it just gives them a little bit of ownership, but also a bit of freedom to kind of decide things. It's really nice with Gen Pop because it allows people to set their own goals. Like I've got some retirees because I've introduced that approach, they're like, yeah, fuck it, let's roll the dice. And that's a really nice feeling to have with people who've come in and they're quite timid and worried that the gym is not an environment that suits them. So I think Everyday Maxes are fantastic for that, but they have to suit the person. I've got some clients I don't use them with because it just doesn't work. They either push too hard or they lowball it. So I tend to pick for them, or I can eyeball it and go, yeah, it's not heavy enough, put more on the bar.
Yeah. To clarify for the listeners, even though it's called an Everyday Max, you're not doing it every day. You're doing it twice a week, right?
Yeah, no, you're definitely not maxing every single day. This is not like one of those I squat every day programs that was really popular about 5 years ago.
That was big back in the day. It would have been 2011, 2012, I think.
Yeah, and then it had a resurgence in about 2019. There were a few people like, I've been doing this for 8 years. I'm like, have you? Really?
Actually, I did see a YouTube recommendation. It was like day, I don't know what it was. It must have been like somewhere in the mid hundreds or close to 1,000 days or something of like daily max squatting.
What do you do at Christmas, holidays? Like, imagine being
you squat, man.
I always think of this sometimes because jiu-jitsu is kind of guilty of this sort of hardo mentality that people bring in, especially because the sport is not truly professional yet. So you haven't had, it reminds me of rugby in the mid 90s, early 2000s, especially in the UK where we were sort of playing catch up with everyone else. And these guys come in and are like, oh yeah, I'm going to squat every day. I'm going to do all of this. And I'm like, I train this hard. I work this many hours a week and all of this stuff. And I'm like, but so where's your life in amongst all of this? Like where are your kids? Where are your wife? I have some of my clients will come and say, oh, should I be doing this? And I'm like, do you want to see your mum and dad on weekends? Do you want to Like, we have to be realistic about the trade-offs that we're making here. If you're happy with that and you're comfortable with the balance that you've got, that's absolutely fine. Like, go for it. But I think this is expectation that you're supposed to live this sort of ascetic, like Olympian style lifeline. And it's like, yeah, Olympians don't even really like doing that. They do it because they know the glory that will come with that, and the beauty of kind of sacrificing for a broader goal. But living that every day, like, what are you like to the people around you? I can't imagine being the husband of one of those guys who's like, sorry, darling, can't go on holiday where you want to go. I need a squat rack. Like, it just, yeah, it just smacks of being a little, not really self-aware enough. But again, it's going to be personality types, isn't it? I don't want to be that guy, but for other people, they do. So, but it's helpful to kind of have that conversation with athletes, because they'll come to you, as you know, like they'll come to you with stuff and you're just like, oh, fuck me, what is this? And it's reminding them that, like, what sits behind that? What do you think that guy's daily life looks like? How do you think other people talk about him? Is that what you want? Do you want people to remember you for the reasons that guy clearly wants to be remembered for? And if that's yes, have at it. But for a lot of guys, they kind of sit and go, oh yeah, no, that's not what I want my nan to think of me. I'm like, there you go, then. Problem solved.
Yeah, I don't think people realize what goes into it. I mean, my wife was training and preparing for Commonwealth Games and Olympics. I was working in coaching and professional sport, and it's just like chaos.
Yeah.
I mean, she's training, once, twice a day, and like broken because she's got to compete more. She's basically got to do like a juices competitive schedule in weightlifting, because that's what they do. And as a natty, so she's just like breaking, and then, I'm traveling away on camps and shit, and it's just like, yeah, the schedules are insane. The schedules are insane once you get to that level, and it's a young man's game, not for the faint-hearted, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a reason that people's Olympic careers are a set amount of time, and that's that. Yeah. And I think it's just a lack of context. People don't look at the what sits around it. I think that's that's my favorite talking point, is people's lack of taking things in context. Because just because it works for that individual, like, you are not them. You have not done the training that they have done. You have not lived the life that they have done. You've not necessarily got the support network that they have, or be as close to divorce as they are, or, what, all of these other factors that we don't see. So you have to make the best decisions to fit your circumstances, rather than trying to just take someone else's cut and dried approach and then apply it to your life. And I think, like, for us as coaches, that seems obvious, but for people who've never kind of experienced that, it's easy to be drawn in by the sort of bright lights. And especially, like, now that with Instagram, there's so much more behind the scenes of how people train and what their life is like as an athlete. And you're like, this isn't behind the scenes. This is borderline propaganda of, like, look how much fun they're having while they're training for the Olympics. You're like, yeah, that's probably the one fun thing they did that week, because they enjoy the sport, but there's only so much of your favorite thing you can do until it becomes very challenging, I would imagine.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I want to round this podcast out as well with another Mladen favorite that you like to use, the Badger Protocol. It's one I haven't actually gone. I haven't actually read into this one. I've seen a lot of coaches use it. So maybe just give me kind of why, the rationale of what, when, why, how, when.
Yeah. So I know Mladen, so he created it because he does enduro racing, which is like a form of motorbike riding. And when the season ended, he was like, I feel like hot trash. I don't want to do any of the lifting that I would normally do. And so he didn't want to lift particularly heavy, but didn't want to do loads of reps either, and was like, how do I kind of bridge the gap into wanting to get back into the gym, basically? And it's essentially an isometric sandwich. So you do an isometric, you do a number of reps, and then you may or may not do an isometric at the end, because you can do open badger sets or closed badger sets, or he said like open sandwich, closed sandwich. And that could be, it's usually sort of, I tend to use 50 to 55% of 1 rep max. And then dependent on the exercise, it will be a 5 count pause. So a 5 count squeeze isometric at the bottom position, or the most challenging position of whatever exercise you use. 5 reps, 5 count squeeze, done. So they end up doing 7 total reps. The only point where they don't end up doing 7 total reps, and Mladen has even said, like, you can do either. It doesn't matter whether you do 7 reps or you do, you count the isometric reps as reps, so that you do 3 normal reps with an isometric either side, or you do 5 normal reps with an isometric either side. The exercises where that tends to be a bit more normal for are like trap bar deadlift and overhead press, because you already start from the most disadvantaged position. So when you start with the isometric, it's just off the chest, or if it's just off the floor, that tends to lend itself better to, I find, including that first one as a rep, because it's just, it can be pretty brutal if you don't. Now, if people enjoy it or they're particularly strong, like, yeah, make them do the horrible version. But I tend to use it for 2 things. I tend to use it as a form of GPP. I really like it for, I've had quite a few grapplers come on board in the last few months. They've all had it. 1, so that they can get used to the bottom position of all of the exercises. 2, so that they essentially, like, I would like them to do a lot of volume, but I don't want to steal that fatigue from them that they could be spending on the mats. So I like that it almost simulates volume without actually needing to necessarily get the recovery costs of all of that volume. So the isometric makes those 5 reps harder and makes the total set feel harder without, because of the lack of movement, it doesn't actually force you to do any more mechanical work. So we haven't got more damage, or whatever we want to call it, to then actually recover from, of, say, doing a 15 rep set. I then also use it, I've got 2 ways that I tend to deload people, well, 3 ways that I tend to deload people. I will either use aerobic GPP if they don't hate it. I've got 1 or 2 clients who can't stand it, so we don't go near it, and they're well conditioned as well, so they can pick. I will use badger sets, or I will just, if they really like what they're doing, I'll just take a third of the volume off whatever we've been doing and just let them do that, and maybe like reduce the percentages down a bit for a week. Even sometimes, actually, I like good old classic 3 sets of 10 with 50%. But yeah, I think badger sets are a really nice one for that, because you can even just do 2 sets and they still feel like they've done a decent amount of work. And personally as well, for them building into triphasic, it makes the isometrics and the eccentrics seem a little less intimidating, because they've already been introduced to the concept of tempo. Because I find most of the guys who've worked with me, even if they've trained a lot, they generally haven't played with tempo, aside from kind of bodybuilding slow sets and stuff like that. They've never really had to think about specifically making one aspect of the lift have an emphasis. So it's a nice way of introducing that as a concept quite early. And it's also less brutal than jumping straight, or when you come to an isometric phase of triphasic, which is a very aggressive form of that. So it can be helpful for them to get a little bit of that learning early on in the program and then come back to it later heavier. So
you can do open, which would be 5 seconds. Let's say you're squatting, you do 5 seconds at the bottom, 3 to 5 reps, and then another 5 seconds hold at the bottom.
That'd be a closed sandwich, because you've got he calls it, he refers to it as the sandwiches are the bits of bread are the isometrics, and then the reps are the meat.
Then you can reverse that. You can do 3 to 5 reps, then the isometric hold, and then another 3 to 5 reps.
I've never done that. I'm sure Mladen would say you could play with whatever you wanted, but I've only ever really done it with the reps at the start, and then either at the end or not at all. So like a big one for me is chin-ups and pull-ups, generally, because I'll ban them if we have to. I don't really like doing a lot of banded work with those, because I don't think it translates very nicely into doing it with body weight and then doing it with weight. If it's a deload, yeah, fine, we'll do that. But I quite like, for badger sets for that, we'll just do a 3 count squeeze and then 3 reps. And then if they're strong enough, then a 3 count squeeze. As they get stronger and stronger, we can do the traditional badger, but you have to be pretty good at pull-ups and chin-ups to be able to do that off the bat, or very light. And I work with quite a few big boys, so we have to figure out how we do it.
3 seconds at the top.
Yeah, 3 count squeeze at the top and then full rep. So you've already done 1 rep in the first place anyway, so...
so you count that first one as a gotcha. Okay,
you can do. You don't. Yeah. That's the point. As Mladen's like, you can be as strict as you want. Try both, see what fits them. And I quite like it for that, especially with pulling exercises where you're using body weight, because you can be a bit more fast and loose. You can judge the set based on the quality of the reps. Because I for me, for chin ups and pull ups, I'd much rather that people were further away from failure. Anytime I tried to develop personally when I was doing pull-ups and chin-ups and I get close to failure, the wheels fall off after a few weeks, and I always feel like it's 1 step forward, 3 steps back. Whereas as soon as with Will, he was like, I don't want you failing reps. These shouldn't look like shit. It just went through the roof really quickly for me. So I tend to prefer to go off quality of rep, especially for badger sets with that.
Almost like a Jim Wendlerism as well.
Yeah.
We used to put I ran so many cycles of 5-3-1 back in the day where you just do either band pull aparts or like pull ups between every single set of pressing.
Yeah.
And I would do that. I literally just accumulate pull up like sets of 5, which was like, I don't know, 50% or lower in terms of total reps. And you just bang out sets of 5 pull ups after every single set of pressing or bench press or accessory stuff. And yeah, I like that. I really like that concept. It works well.
I don't hate it. I just probably pushed it too close to failure for me. Like I did Harry Selko, if you remember him on Elite FTS. He was a strength coach, and I can't remember where he was, but he was continually barefoot, and he had like what was it, like the kind of tank that you put petrol or gasoline into to like fill up your car. He had one of those that he just filled with whatever he'd drink for the day, and then he'd drink out of it. And you're like, this is quite the persona you've created. This is amazing. But he would do a progression where it was you do 10 singles, and then you'd add a double, and then you'd add a second double until eventually you got to 10 sets of 10. Now, I don't know anyone who ever got to the 10 sets of 10, and I sure as shouldn't. Everything would fall apart to me for about when I started introducing triples. But that, like, again, it's a different approach. I probably just didn't leave long enough between them, but that made me, that having the lack of success that it did, and then Will forcing me to take more time, made a big difference for me. So I tend to try and do the same with my clients.
That's a big old school physical culturist approach. I'm actually looking at my bookshelf. I've got a bunch of the books, like old Paul Anderson stuff and Brooks Kubik's dinosaur training stuff. And there's so much stuff in
dinosaur training.
That's my favorite training book.
It's a blast from the past. I do remember when that first came out, there were some Premiership rugby sides that I think it was dinosaur training, where they immediately started introducing strongman style, odd implement and awkward lifts. And unsurprisingly, because those guys hadn't really done much lifting aside from bodybuilding, everything fell apart within like, I think I remember James Haskell talking about it. And we're like, we did it once and then we didn't do it again. Because it's just such an aggressive fit for such a,
well, if you've only been doing bodybuilding stuff, you're gonna.
Well, and also one of the principles that sits behind. Sorry, last night I sat down and wrote my whole rationale because I felt woefully underprepared. But one of the things I think is sports sit on a continuum of chaos or complexity, and the problem that we have as coaches, and the problem that a lot of people find when they look online, is that most of the stuff that's freely available to you is heavily influenced by either bodybuilding or Olympic-style strength coaching. And for a lot of the Olympics and a lot of the early research, it was around track and field. And track and field sits on the not very fucking complex set. And I don't mean that to say like track and field people are stupid. What I mean is there's not a lot going on in that sport. Many of them are you versus you, or you get your turn, then someone else gets their turn, then someone else gets their turn. So the rule sets are very, very tight. You want to run 100 meters. There's very strict rules about how you set up, when you're allowed to set off, and you have to stay in your lane and just run to the end. Like that's quite straightforward. No one is allowed to grab your arm, pull you to one side, bump into you. Like they might do it by accident, but they could also like be disqualified for that. So they're very tight. And so as a result, you can work quite extensively on like transfer and specificity because you can just measure it. Like, did the 100 meters go up? Okay, sweet. Bicep curls seem to help with that. Like a stupid example, but you could, as a coach, spend 4 years working out which exercises tend to improve their times and use those. For the rest of us working at the kind of more complex end, where we've got like field sports, contact sports, all of those introduce levels of chaos. I actually think that the most chaotic sport that I am aware of is probably Jiu Jitsu. And that's largely because the sport is still quite infantile. So there is no strict set definition of what the sport is. Like you could do EBI, CJI and ADCC. They're 3 different rule sets. And yet they're some of the biggest competitions going. You go to Polaris, another different rule set. I think some of that might change with what Craig Jones is doing at the Craig Jones Invitational and the fact that the UFC have gone, holy shit, we should be doing the same model. That could change it. because it's going to kind of strictly limit what's valued and what isn't valued within the sport, in the same way that MMA now is a very different beast to where it was in sort of 2009, 2010, where most people don't use a tournament structure. Most people use the unified rules. Like that, it's a bit more set than it used to be. It's not like you compete in one state and you've got a different set of rules about what a downed opponent is. Whereas in jiu-jitsu, you could, this is my biggest bugbear, is people go, oh, what's jiu-jitsu specific? Nothing can be, because even your jiu-jitsu training, which is the most specific thing, sport training is the most specific thing you can do for a sport, that could be wrong, because you could spend your entire training camp focusing on a specific game that you want to play and your opponent denies it to you for the entire match. So the classic example I like to use is Owen Livesey is a phenomenal judoka and a really incredible stand-up artist in jiu-jitsu. He competed at CJI against, and a couple of other competitions against Nicky Rod. And unsurprisingly, he for whatever reason was like, we're going to have a bit of a back and forth. This is going to be great. It would have been magnificent to watch, to see two of the best stand-up artists in the game in jiu-jitsu go against each other. Nick Rodriguez is not stupid, so he just went, I'm going to sit to guard and wrestle up. And so that whole game that Owen had been working on was now meaningless, because he couldn't get it going because Nicky Rod just refused to play that game. And if we can't even get that specific with our sport training, then how on earth are we supposed to know? You know, I did see your point about athleticism won't harm anyone. Absolutely. I agree with that. There's nothing wrong with jumps and sort of developing rate of force development, even though jiu-jitsu is a very slow sport. It's not going to harm them. But it really bothers me when guys who clearly aren't as experienced as coaches, and I say this, I'm not that experienced, but there are guys out there who are they've just taken what was an American football training program or something they saw from some Olympian where they're you're going to train 7 days a week. Okay, you've not coached anyone. Yeah. We're going to do hill sprints. Okay. That isn't going to make you better than someone else on the mats. Explosiveness is not the key KPI for the sport. It just isn't. I remember Will saying to me that probably, because I asked him one day, I was like, what are the KPIs for jiu-jitsu? Because I can't see any meaningful ones in terms of ones that I know will consistently result in improvement. So in MMA, you can at least know they need to be explosive, because the more explosive they are, the more likelihood of a knockout. In rugby, they need to be able to sprint and change direction, because those tend to be game-changing moments when they work, or they'll injure you. So you do it from that perspective as well. But for jiu-jitsu, other than being able to squeeze and having a good capacity to recover so you don't gas out, there isn't really much. Will argue that actually the strength to have a good base is probably worth its weight in gold. Because if you can be very difficult to sweep, then that will help. But I also know Will trains a lot of gi, so I don't know how much that translates necessarily over to no gi. But it's not a bad point that you can do that sort of thing. But I think it's also, so going on here, but I also think that's why we get a lot of people getting away with not necessarily being particularly nuanced coaches, because you can get away with very, very basic strength training for jiu-jitsu for a lot longer than you can in power sports.
I've been saying this for a long time. A lot of people I talk to on here, a lot of people in DMs and stuff, mention the same thing. It's so heavily biased to strength and size that you can literally just run bodybuilding, powerlifting programs. And you'll still excel at the sport, because it's just so technical. But then the strength and size advantage is so big compared to other sports that, I mean, you look at what's the strongman's name that started ex-professional strongman guy that started competing?
Yeah, I know who you mean. Long hair. Martin Zlikas.
Yeah, I mean, he's going to fucking crush everyone.
Yeah, he turned up at one of the ADCCs. I mean, it was white belt, but he just bullied them. It was phenomenal to watch them all panic and go, "Oh my god, I'm being Kimura'd."
The strength and size advantage is just, is going to be with him all the way through. Of course, there'll be, when you have huge technical differences, but even then, the strength and size advantage just shuts down a lot of the different techniques that someone can use on you. So that's why, as you mentioned, you can get away with so many people just just doing really, I mean, there's nothing wrong with really basic strength training. It just, for jiu-jitsu, there's just outside of that, there's not so much more that's going to influence what's going to happen other than mat time.
Yeah. And that is the principle for probably my whole program is I want to make sure people are in, they get a decent stimulus. All of the like problem areas are covered. So we never take arm work out, shoulder work, depending on how bad people's shoulders are as well, because I want those areas to be robust. Like nothing will stop you in your tracks like elbow tendinopathy. So it's very much worth putting that stuff in. But aside from that, I want them to get in and get out so they can be on the mats. My worst nightmare is someone having a bad jiu-jitsu session because they're still tired from my training, or because they're sore and fatigued and like, I skipped training today because my legs hurt too much. Like I worked with a guy who, Cal, my first ever client, who used to compete quite a lot, and he was at Grapple Fest, and in the build up to, it wasn't Grapple Fest, sorry, but anyway, right, in the build up to the competition, he messaged me saying, I haven't been able to get in training this week because he works full time and had been traveling for work. Should I do wrestling tomorrow or should I lift? And I was like, which one's going to win you the match? And he was like, probably not lifting. Okay, we'll lift next week. Like 1 week off does not matter. And I think that probably might surprise some people. It surprises some of my clients when I'm like, yeah, don't worry about it. We're back to it next week. Because for me, it's that long-term, we want, what was it Will said? You want to play long-term games with long-term people. And I'm not that worried if 1 week is missed, or, I'm not asking them to squat 7 days a week in their hotel room and upset every family member. But yeah.
Plus everything is strength training. So even wrestling is still strength training. So that kind of plays into it too. But I appreciate you coming on, David. Where can people find and follow you? Keep up what you're doing.
Yeah. Online, they can find me at Get Strong Roll More on Instagram. That's basically the only place that I am. I've got a YouTube, but that's mainly for me to put exercise things for my clients on. I did have X, and then I deleted it. It did my head in.
It sucks now.
Yeah, so bad. I had enough people trying to sell me courses and bots talking to me. I was like, yeah, I'm good. I'm deleting this.
No, fair enough. I'll put that down in the description for anyone who's interested and keep me up with you. But I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you very much, mate.